Welcome. And today we're going to examine the events that we would lead up to what would be traditionally known as Good Friday. The events of Jesus being arrested in that Garden of Gethsemane up to the point where he found out his final verdict from man's government. So last time we looked at Let's bring us into the narrative here. Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And as he was praying, Judas brings the temple guards there to try to arrest him. They did. The disciples thought that they were going to help him out, but instead they got scared and they ran away. So they lead Jesus now into the first of 4 different trials. Now, all of these trials that Jesus would go through were not things that ought to have been done. First of all, had Jesus done anything wrong? No. And in the religious people's eyes, they thought he did everything wrong. He proclaimed himself to be God. He did this and that and the other. So they lead him in. And as they lead him in, Peter, remember Peter? Peter was the man who cut off the guy's ear. Also, the same one who would say that I would never deny you. He follows, but it's interesting to note that in verse 54 of Luke 22, and Peter followed afar off. He wasn't close, he was far. He didn't want to be seen. He, just like all the other ones, were afraid of what was going on, what was happening. And so as he goes and Jesus is getting prepared for that first trial with the religious group, what would be termed as the Sanhedrin, Peter is noticed. Verse 56 of Luke 22, but a certain maid beheld him as he sat by the fire and earnestly looked upon him and said, this man was also with him. They said, hey, you were with Jesus. I recognize you. And guess what Peter says? He denied him. Didn't Jesus say, you would deny me? Sure enough, verse 57. And he denied him, saying, woman, I know him not. Never heard of him. Not at all. So, after a while, another one also says, hey, I know you. Now, this is the guy that would indicate later on in John, this was the same guy that Peter had given him a job there on his ear. Says, I recognize you. And Peter says, man, I am not. I did nothing. I don't even know who Jesus is. So, about an hour, another confidently affirmed, saying, of this truth, this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. The way you speak, you have to be with Jesus. Verse 60, and Peter said, man, I know not what thou sayest. The other gospel says he started to swear and curse and completely say that he was not a part of Jesus. But at that time, while he spake, the rooster crowed. And ironic enough, where Peter was at, verse 61, and the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. Can you imagine? Imagine you do something wrong and you get caught in the act. That's probably happened to you. I hope not a lot, but you're doing something that you're not supposed to do and you're trying to hide it. Next thing you know, your mom or dad's right there and you're like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. You're like, help, mercy, I need help. And the mom and dad's just like shaking their head. No, you know what you've done wrong. But here's Peter being looked at by Jesus. Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, before the rooster crows, thou shalt deny me thrice 3 times. And Peter did that. And Peter, verse 62, went out and wept bitterly. He had realized that he had done what he said he was never going to do. He lied. Well, Jesus told him it was going to happen. Yeah, but Peter didn't want to believe it. So Peter wasn't there. So they go into the first trial. And as this happens, they mock him. They beat him. They say, hey, who hit you? If you know everything, who hit you? Could Jesus have said it? Absolutely. But he didn't. They had false people come in and try to lie about Jesus, saying this is a blasphemer, someone who says something that's wrong, that's not true. Jesus didn't answer anything. Except he said this. He said unto him, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I also ask you, you will not answer me, nor let me go. Hereafter shall the Son of Man sit on the right hand of the power of God. And they all said, are you then the Son of God? And he said unto them, ye say that I am. You're saying it. He's like, and the Sanhedrin, they're like, we have no more need of this. We already know that this man's a blasphemer. We already know that this man is not God's man. And first, they couldn't kill him. They had no authority to do that. So then they sent him to the government. They sent him now to the second trial with a man named Pilate, Pontius Pilate. And here's what they say in verse 23. They began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar. Now, I failed to mention this earlier, but they had asked Jesus, who should we give money to? And they gave him a coin. And Jesus said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, to God the things which are God's. They tried to trap him, but it didn't work. What's God is God's. What's the government's is the government's. So we owe people money, we ought to pay them. We owe God, we ought to make sure we don't forget that neither. Saying that he himself is Christ the King. Now they didn't understand that Jesus was the Messiah to save their soul. They thought that he was here to rescue them from their bondage and become this independent nation. Well, Jesus is going to come back to reign one day for 1,000 years on this earth. It's not now. Wasn't then at this point. Jesus had came to the earth the first time to save sinners. Second time he's saving the world. As far as leading the world. Pilate asked him, said, art thou the King of the Jews? He said unto him and said, thou sayest it. And what does Pilate do? I find nothing. There's nothing here that I can say about this. Pilate was a governor. But he's like, another thing. He's not in my area. There's someone else you can send him to. So Jesus has his third trial. Goes to this man named Herod. Not the same Herod that was alive when Jesus was a baby. And asked who he was. Herod wanted to see him. Because he wanted to see something good happen. He wanted to have something good be done by Jesus himself. He questioned him, but nothing happened. The priests and the scribes, they tried to accuse him. He says, hey, I can't do anything about this. They mocked him, but they sent him back again to Pilate. So trial number 4, back to Pilate. He says, hey, there's nothing I can do. He has done nothing wrong to the government. Pilate was looking at governmental things. There was nothing that he was doing. He wasn't overthrowing the Romans. He wasn't doing all these other things. He was just trying. Jesus was here to go for souls. And he's still in the soul-saving business. He says, I will therefore chastise him and release him. I'll talk to him and and we'll let him go. But they didn't want that to happen. But Pilate had a tradition where he would release somebody at the Passover time. So Jesus was one of the candidates, and another man was named Barabbas. Now this man, he was a murderer. He had done things that were extremely wrong, things that you wouldn't even want to know. But Pilate had to give between two. He says, hey, we have Jesus and we have Barabbas. He allowed the people to make that choice. But they said, give us Barabbas. Kill Jesus, give us Barabbas. Kill Jesus, give us Barabbas. Crucify Jesus, give us this man who is a fear and menace to our society. And get rid of this guy who's trying to help us out. Now that does not make sense, does it? But that's exactly what's playing out here. Pilate said he's done no evil. He's done nothing. But they kept trying to do more and trying to find a way to get Pilate, and they started threatening him, hey, if you don't listen to us, we'll go up to the Roman emperor and he's going to come down on you. Pilate's wife, right before he was about to give his final sentence, she had mentioned that, I had a dream. This may not work out so well. You should release him. You should release Jesus. So Pilate goes and washes his hands. He says, what you do is not on me. I will release Barabbas, and you can take Jesus. Your choice, not mine, your choice. You can take Jesus and crucify him. And he delivered them to their will. They beat him. They whipped him with a cat o' nine tails, which is this large whip of bones and glass and all that, and things that just wrap around. Did that 39 times. They put a crown of thorns on his head, gave him a purple robe to mock him for his royalty, and then they made him try to carry his own cross. But after all that beating that had taken place, Jesus had no strength to take that cross. And that cross wasn't light. It wasn't like the one that's in the picture below me here on the screen. This is a pretty heavy thing. So they get one of these other guys, strong guys named Simon, to go carry that cross there and lead him up. And Jesus was then crucified, nails put into the hand and other hand and into the feet, and they hung him up. And what that would do is it would cause him to not be able to breathe as well, because he's hung and he's suspended. And in order to breathe, he had to come up. His feet were trapped. So basically, it was a really quick way of trying to get rid of somebody. And he was in the center. There were two thieves that were crucified with him. At that time, people were doing things like gambling and all that, mocking him. Hey, you saved others. Can't you save yourself? If you're the Son of God, you can get down from there. Could Jesus have done that? Yeah. But that wasn't his purpose. People mocked him, wanted to give him vinegar, which basically kills your taste buds. Makes you thirst even more. Says, hey, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. One of the thieves on the cross would say, hey, you're God, right? You can bring us all down. Me, you, him. And the other thief says, hey, this guy's done nothing wrong. He's done nothing to deserve this. We did. We're thieves. But this man here is innocent. And he asked Jesus, essentially, to be saved. And Jesus says, you'll be saved. When you die, you will go and meet my Father up in heaven. So Jesus is up there. They mention 7 things. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And why did God turn his back on Jesus? Because of all the sin that was coming on him for you and I. God couldn't stand to look at his son because of that. And he knew that. But he knew that that was the price that he was willing to pay to take all of our sins on himself. So he hangs on that cross. And then he says 3 simple words at the very end of his time. He was up there for at least 6 hours. It's getting close to nightfall. They had to get the bodies down and buried because Passover's about to come, the Sabbath's about to come, and they can't work. So Jesus cries these last 3 words, "It is finished." And there he died on that cross. Now, one of the traditions is if someone wasn't dead by then, they'd break the bones of their legs so they couldn't pull up and breathe, and they would essentially suffocate up there. Many people said that Jesus died because of a broken heart, with all the pressure and all the things that have happened up there. Jesus died of a broken heart. And can you imagine? His heart broke for the people. So Jesus was on that cross. He died. They took him down. Not a bone was broken. They did thrust a spear to make sure, but it was mixture, so he was dead. There was no other proof. And they go to bury him. And a man comes along, says, "Hey, you can put him in my tomb. No one has ever been buried in that tomb. You can go ahead and put him there." And this guy's name here was Joseph of Arimathea, was a follower of Jesus Christ. And then they allowed him to go there, to go into that tomb. And a centurion realized when Jesus died that sure enough, he was indeed the Son of God. He had a new tomb and no one had been in there. And what they also thought of was this, is that, you know what? The religious people said, "Hey, we've heard this guy. You know what his disciples are going to try to do? They're going to try to pull him out and say, 'Hey, he's risen from the dead. Let's guard that tomb.'" I said, "Okay, you want to do that? Go ahead." So they guard that tomb. And there Jesus laid for those days until the end of the Sabbath. And that's where we will pick up next time when we talk about the greatest truth, the greatest story of all Scripture. Good Friday is a day that Jesus died on our cross. There's a song we sing, at the cross, where I first saw the light and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight. And now I am happy all the day. That cross is where we can go to see our need for salvation. See our need that Jesus' heart was broken for us. And that he wants to save us. Of course, the event that happens on what we would now call Easter Sunday, if that event didn't take place and he stayed dead, there would be no hope at all. Many people have died, but only one person rose himself from the grave. And we'll look at that for Easter and Easter Sunday. I encourage you, looking at these stories here, be reminded of the big sacrifice Jesus did for you and I. And don't take it for granted. Jesus wants you. You just got to simply trust him.